Hello everyone, and welcome to our video all about sugar and honey for infants. So similar to salt, recommendations for sugar are simple. We want to limit and avoid if possible. So the reason for limiting sugar is predominantly for preventing cavities. Secondary to this is preventing heart disease and diabetes, particularly with the focus on not giving juice or sugar sweetened beverages to infants. Now, avoiding sugar in the diet for kids under 2 is also important because high sugar foods can displace foods with lots of other awesome essential nutrients for kids like protein, essential fatty acids like omega-3s, and vitamin and minerals. So we want those to take priority in a baby's diet, especially if they're not eating a ton of food, rather than something that's sweet and has a lot of added sugar. So quick myth busting time before we move on. Sweet taste preference in kids is not linked at all to the early introduction of fruit or to the type of milk an infant is given, meaning breast milk or formula. So if you ever hear someone say, don't give your baby fruit that young, like at 6 months, because they're gonna love sweets their whole life, that's not founded in research at all. That's an old wives' tale. The same with feeding your baby breast milk or formula is going to affect their taste for sugar in the future. It's not. So general recommendations for sugar are to avoid added sugar in foods. This means avoiding prepackaged foods with added sugar and modifying recipes that you make at home to have less or no added sugar. For example, choose the no added sugar applesauce and modify the recipe of your sweet potato muffins to have no sugar in them. You also want to avoid sugary foods or sugary drinks like juice. I don't recommend serving juice to kids at all. There is no need for juice in a child's diet unless you're using very small amounts to address constipation, in which case you want to make sure that you're talking to your doctor or your pediatric dietitian about the best way to do this. So when it comes to cavities now, before I mention that one of the biggest reasons why we recommend limiting sugar in the diet of infants is to prevent cavities. So let's talk about specific recommendations for cavity prevention. First and foremost, do not allow baby to fall asleep with the bottle. Doing so can increase the risk that milk will pool around your child's teeth when they're sleeping, providing fuel for those bacteria that cause cavities. Now, this does not apply to falling asleep at the breast. This only applies to falling asleep with the bottle, regardless of if there is breast milk or formula in that bottle. Second recommendation when it comes to cavity prevention, start brushing teeth in infancy. Not only is this going to help with texture acceptance because we're introducing a new texture of like the silicone toothbrush or teether to the mouth, but it's also going to help with cavity prevention and help with teeth brushing acceptance as your baby becomes a toddler. Teeth brushing can often be a challenging activity for parents and little ones. So if we start with teeth brushing young in infancy, we can increase their acceptance of teeth brushing as they become a toddler. And third specific recommendation when it comes to cavities, if you are going to serve something sweet, so if you choose to serve something sweet, limit that potential cavity causing food to only be served at mealtimes. Don't serve something like juice as a standalone snack. Again, I don't recommend serving juice to your baby, but if you are choosing to do so at a mealtime rather than as a standalone snack. So do I generally advocate for avoiding restriction in kids to avoid picky eating? Yes, that is one of the hallmarks of the things that I teach, and you can learn more about that inside my Growing Intuitive Eaters 101 course, which I'll link down here in the description. But for infants under 1, I do recommend avoiding added sugar altogether. But it's important to take a balanced approach. So for example, don't stress if your baby has a sugar exposure at grandparents' house or they're eating cake on their first birthday. Instances like that aren't gonna have long-term health implications. Now, we want to address restriction mentality, and we can address that in toddlerhood, but for infancy, the priority with sugar is going to be avoiding it as much as you can. So now let's talk about honey real quick before we wrap up this video. Honey should be avoided for all infants under 1, period. This is due to the risk of botulism. So botulism is a foodborne illness caused by the bacteria Clostridium botulinum. This bacteria is especially adept at survival because it produces these really super cool things called spores, which are very, very resistant to things like heat and pressure, which normally kill other types of bacteria. And now these spores create a toxin that causes the illness, botulism, and that can be very, very dangerous for baby. Normally, a person with a healthy immune system might experience no symptoms after ingesting botulism spores, but because a baby's immune system is still developing, baby is at a much higher risk for getting sick from ingesting botulism spores than an adult. Now, because honey is found to contain botulism spores in some samples at a higher rate than other foods, I and the American Academy of Pediatrics recommend that honey not be given to infants under 1 year of age, period, under any circumstances. So this includes honey and baked goods, because cooking and baking, remember, that temperature is not hot enough to kill these spores that can cause botulism. So note that this includes all honey, from supermarket generic brand to farmer's market organic honey or honey from your neighbor's beehive. All types of honey are at risk for containing the botulism spores, regardless of if it's pasteurized or not. So you want to make sure that you're reading food labels. You should be reading food labels for allergens for your infants regardless, but things to especially watch out for honey in are bread, especially like natural bread products or bread from natural grocers, naturally sweetened products. These may include honey, and sauces. Things like stir-fry sauce can often have honey in them as well. So if you're looking for a baby-friendly honey substitute for a recipe and you want to add some sweetness, again, that's your choice as a parent, try something like maple syrup or molasses instead of honey, but you'll have to look up if that's a one-to-one substitution or not, and Google will be your friend there. So that's the end of our video when it comes to honey and sugar. Honey should be avoided in all circumstances, and we generally want to avoid added sugar for infants altogether. Before we hit the outro, I want to tell you about my new virtual office hours. For those of you who want additional accountability or have lots of questions to ask beyond what I can answer in the comments section below, I'm hosting 2 video calls per month where you can have your questions answered by me. $15 per month with no commitment gets you access to office hours on Patreon, and I'll put the link in the description below. If you want to financially support the mission of free nutrition courses for parents, but you don't need the office hours, you can also do that on Patreon. And if you don't need office hours, well, these courses will continue to be free for everyone. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if it was helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.